10 years ago, 5 nuns from 2 different convents requested leave on the exact same day, April 23, 2015. They never returned. Their van was later found abandoned near a remote Vermont lake with no sign of struggle, no trace of the women. Now, after a decade of silence, chilling new evidence has emerged, revealing a hidden network and a message that warns, "We were 5, now 3 remain. Keep searching." The first warmth of spring had finally reached the green hills of Vermont. It was the kind of April morning when the air tasted soft, the sky seemed higher, and the small town of Brookridge seemed to breathe again after months of snow and silence. In the heart of this quiet town stood 2 aging monasteries, St. Agnes Abbey and Our Lady of Providence Convent. Though separated by a few miles and belonging to different religious orders, the sisters often crossed paths at community events and charitable works. They knew each other's faces, prayed for one another, and shared occasional quiet conversations when fate allowed. But no one, neither the townsfolk nor the clergy, could have imagined the tragedy that was about to unfold. It began with a simple request. In early April 2015, Sister Margaret Bell of St. Agnes Abbey, a woman known for her wisdom and serenity, submitted a formal letter asking for a single day of leave. The stated reason was clear and unremarkable. She wished to visit St. Martin's Chapel, a small historic church deep in the forests north of Silver Lake, about 2 hours' drive away. A day of prayer and reflection in a sacred space, she explained. The abbess approved it without question. Just days later, a second request came, this time from Sister Elaine Moore of Our Lady of Providence. Same date, same destination. Her superior raised an eyebrow, for St. Martin's Chapel wasn't a common pilgrimage site, but Sister Elaine was deeply devout and often sought out places of contemplation. Approval granted. Then came the 3rd, 4th, and 5th requests, 2 more from St. Agnes, 1 more from Our Lady of Providence. The names: Sister Harriet Lowe, Sister Beatrice King, and Sister Maria Alvarez, all asking to visit St. Martin's Chapel on April 23rd. Each request made independently with no apparent coordination, but by the time the abbesses noticed the pattern, it felt too late and too awkward to interfere. After all, the sisters were adults, trusted members of their orders. The coincidences of faith were strange but not impossible. Perhaps this was God's hand moving unseen. No one thought much more about it until the day itself. That Thursday dawned crisp and clear. The sisters, dressed in modest civilian clothing over their habits, gathered before sunrise in St. Agnes's modest parking lot, where Sister Harriet had arranged for a rental van. The mood was light, almost joyful. A day away from the confines of stone walls, a chance to breathe new air. They exchanged smiles, packed small picnic baskets, and prayed together before setting off. The van, a gray Ford Transit, pulled out onto the winding rural roads at 6:12 a.m. At 8:49 a.m., the van was captured by a gas station security camera near Silver Lake, about 20 miles from their intended destination. The driver, Sister Harriet, appeared calm. The others could be seen inside, chatting and laughing. They bought coffee and fuel, then continued north. That was the last confirmed sighting of the 5 women. By nightfall, alarm bells were ringing. When the sisters failed to return by evening prayers, their abbesses called one another in concern. No message had been received, no one answered their cell phones, basic flip phones issued for emergency use only. After an hour of tense waiting, the abbesses contacted the local sheriff. Deputies began their search with the obvious, tracing the van's route. At dawn on April 24th, a search party found the abandoned Ford Transit parked neatly on a dirt road beside Black Hollow Lake, a remote body of water surrounded by thick pines and known mostly to local fishermen. The vehicle was locked. Inside were 5 small backpacks, several half-empty water bottles, and the untouched picnic baskets. But the sisters were gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks. Only a faint trail of boot prints leading toward the narrow path that circled the lake. And even those prints vanished on the rocky shoreline. Divers searched the cold waters for days, finding nothing. Tracking dogs lost the scent within minutes. The surrounding forests were posted in every church and shop, from Brookridge to the Canadian border. News outlets picked up the story, framing it with solemn headlines. 5 sisters vanish on Vermont pilgrimage, faith in fear, the mystery of the missing nuns. As days turned to weeks, theories abounded. Some whispered of a voluntary disappearance, a radical spiritual retreat. Others feared foul play, perhaps a chance encounter with a predator in the woods. The police found no evidence to support either claim, and the case, despite national attention, slowly grew cold. At the convents, the losses were felt like open wounds. Masses were held daily for the missing sisters. The abbesses, burdened by guilt, questioned whether they should have seen the pattern sooner, whether they should have stopped the trip. In their hearts, the same haunting question repeated endlessly. Why had 5 women from 2 separate houses chosen the same day, the same distant chapel, without telling one another? It was a question that would remain unanswered for years to come. Sheriff Thomas Avery stared at the abandoned Ford Transit under the cold morning light. The vehicle sat eerily still beneath a tangle of pine branches, its windows fogged by the night's chill. Around him, deputies worked methodically, photographing the scene, dusting for prints, logging every scrap of evidence. But there was little to log. 5 neatly packed backpacks perfectly undisturbing them. There was little to log. No blood, no torn clothing, no sign of a struggle, only that faint, vanishing trail of boot prints. Sheriff Avery had seen plenty in his 25 years wearing a badge, but this one left a knot in his gut. 5 women, all devout nuns, vanishing vain one no trace, and from this spot, so remote no casual traveler would find it by accident. It made no sense. He radioed in a perimeter search, requesting drones and canine units. They swept the dense forest surrounding Black Hollow Lake for 3 days straight. The divers worked tirelessly, scouring the dark waters, but the lake gave up no secrets. No bodies, no clothing, not even a piece of jewelry or a rosary. It was as if the women had stepped off the face of the earth. As the search expanded, locals from Brookridge began to come forward with possible sightings. Most led nowhere, hikers who thought they saw white figures through the trees, a distant splash of movement mistaken for flowing robes. But one account, given on the 4th day, stopped Avery cold. The man's name was Earl Sims, a 71-year-old widower, retired carpenter, and lifelong resident of Brookridge. Every morning, rain or shine, Earl fished the river tributary feeding into Black Hollow Lake. He knew the woods like the back of his hand. Earl arrived unannounced at the sheriff's office, hat in hand, face pale. "Sheriff, I seen something," he said, "and, well, I don't know if it matters, but it didn't feel right." Avery invited him into the interview room, turned on the recorder, and listened as Earl told his story. "It was the morning they went missing, Thursday," Earl began. "I was set up at the old crossing about 2 miles east of the lake, right where the dirt road splits. Around 10, maybe 10:30, I heard an engine coming down the ridge. Not a usual sound for out there, so I looked up. There was this big green truck, older model, no plates, one of them flatbed types with the canvas sides." Earl's voice shook. "And standing there by the truck were 5 women, all of them in white, real bright against the green. They was getting on the back, real quiet, no fuss. And a man. Couldn't see him too good, he was by the driver's door just watching. Whole thing lasted maybe a minute. Then the truck turned off, headed toward County 12. Avery leaned forward. "You're sure about this? 5 women in white?" Earl nodded. "Clear as day. Wasn't no normal hikers or campers neither. Looked like nuns, Sheriff." Avery's mind raced. The location fit, the timeline fit, but the truck, where had it gone? And who was driving it? They pulled Earl's description into the search database. No registered green flatbeds had been reported in the area. No stolen vehicles matching that description. They canvassed gas stations, truck stops, border checkpoints. Nothing. Deputies drove every mile of County 12, knocking on doors, checking surveillance feeds from homes and businesses. No green truck appeared. It was as if it had slipped into the woods and vanished. Days turned into weeks. State police joined the investigation, followed by the FBI. The sisters' families were interviewed. None reported any unusual behavior prior to the disappearance. No suspicious calls, no anonymous letters, no known threats. The abbesses were questioned again and again. Both swore they had no knowledge of why the women had chosen that date, that destination, or one another's plans. Public pressure mounted, news vans lined the streets of Brookridge, commentators speculated wildly, human trafficking, a rogue cult, a mass suicide, but with no bodies and no leads, law enforcement could only tread water. Sheriff Avery pushed hard on the green truck angle. He called in favors from old contacts, circulated Earl's description nationwide. Still, no one came forward. No truck matching the description was found in any impound lot, repair shop, or auction house. It was as if it had never existed. Avery's gut told him otherwise. Trucks didn't vanish, people didn't vanish, someone out there knew more. But with each passing day, hope dimmed. Eventually, even the media lost interest. Other headlines took its place. In Brookridge, the missing sisters remained on prayer lists, their faces gazing down from sun-faded flyers. At both convents, the empty seats in the chapel were a constant, silent ache. By late summer, the case files grew thin. Leads dried up. The official task force disbanded. Avery kept the case open, but privately, he feared it would gather dust like so many cold cases before it. Then, one crisp morning in September, a deputy brought him a torn piece of cloth, discovered snagged high in a pine 2 miles north of the lake. It was pale white, frayed at the edges, and faintly stained. 5 years passed. The forest reclaimed the narrow path to Black Hollow Lake, and the empty Ford Transit had long been towed, its dust-cloaked frame sitting in the sheriff's impound lot like a forgotten relic. The faces of the 5 missing sisters faded from front pages and news cycles. In Brookridge, the town's prayers continued, but hope had turned brittle, worn thin by time. Sheriff Thomas Avery retired in late 2019, his hair more silver than gray, the unsolved case forever etched into the lines of his face. A younger sheriff, Emily Hart, inherited the case files, stacked in her office like a silent accusation. She reviewed them occasionally, but no new leads emerged. At St. Agnes Abbey, life returned to its quiet rhythm. A new generation of Novabis walked its stone halls, unaware of the sorrow that lingered in every. Sister Anne Callahan, now the Abbey's senior archivist, had been a young postulant when the 5 sisters vanished. Their absence had shaped her faith, filled it with a quiet defiance against the darkness of the unknown. In the spring of 2020, as the world outside grappled with its own invisible threat, Sister Anne took it upon herself to reorganize the Abbey's archives. Centuries of documents had been hastily boxed during recent renovations, and many fragile letters and journals risked decay. She worked alone in the old north wing, dust motes swirling in sunbeams as she sorted parchment from yellowed inventories. Late one evening, she opened a battered oak cabinet, long sealed with a rusted latch. Inside lay a jumble of forgotten folders and envelopes. As she sifted through them, her fingers brushed against a thick envelope, sealed but unaddressed, its edges worn. On the front, in a familiar looping hand, were the words, "If I do not return, seek the basement of the old St. Agnes house." Anne's breath caught. The handwriting belonged to Sister Harriet Lowe, the same Sister Harriet who had driven the van to Black Hollow Lake 5 years earlier. The room seemed to tilt. Her heart hammered. With trembling hands, she pried the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of aged paper, ink slightly smudged, as if written in haste. "There are forces within our church that are not of God. We have learned too much. If this reaches you, know that we were taken. Do not trust those who urge silence. Go to the old house. In the basement, you will find proof." Anne sat frozen, the letter shaking in her grip. The old St. Agnes house had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades. Once the original convent building, it now stood boarded and derelict on the far edge of the property. A relic no longer deemed safe for habitation, the sisters rarely spoke of it, but the letter left no room for doubt. Anne folded it carefully and hurried to the abbess. Within hours, Sheriff Hart stood in the abbot's small meeting room. The letter spread before her. She read it twice, her expression darkening. "Why has this never surfaced?" she asked. The abbot, pale and stricken, could only shake her head. That cabinet had been sealed. No one thought to check. Hart wasted no time. Early the next morning, under a gray dawn sky, she arrived at the old St. Agnes house with a forensic team. The structure groaned in the wind, its windows boarded, the roof sagging. Inside, the air smelled of rot and old incense. Cobwebs hung like shrouds in every corner. Using crowbars, they pried open the basement door. The stairs creaked beneath their weight as they descended into darkness. Flashlights pierced the gloom, revealing stone walls slick with damp. At first the room seemed empty, then one deputy called out, a heavy trunk, half hidden behind collapsed shelving. Hart approached, her pulse quickening. They cleared the debris and dragged Murphy's trunk into the light. The latch gave with a screech of protest. Inside lay a collection of items that froze them in place. Neatly packed bundles of U.S. currency, worn but legitimate. Several false identification cards bearing various names and states, accompanied by high-qual passports. But it was the maps that drew Hart's attention. Dozens of them, annotated in precise handwriting. Circles marked remote locations across the Midwest. Old church properties, abandoned seminaries, private compounds. Some were labeled with cryptic notations: Faith Renewal Center, Sanctuary Retreat, Reclamation Site. At the bottom of the trunk lay a journal, its first page inscribed, Harriet Lowe. For the record, Hart opened it with reverence. The first entries chronicled routine Abbey life, but then the tone shifted, mentions of a secret faction within certain church circles, a group obsessed with purification of faith through extreme means, references to re-education camps disguised as spiritual retreats, notes on the sisters' growing suspicion that their own abbey had been infiltrated, and one final line, scrawled hastily, haunting in its simplicity: "They know we are coming. If we vanish, this is why." Hart exhaled slowly. Around her, the deputies exchanged uneasy glances. This was no mere disappearance. This was a conspiracy. A thread buried deep within the church's fabric. And now, after 5 silent years, it was beginning to unravel. Sheriff Emily Hart stood in her office late into the night. Harriet Lowe's journal spread across her desk, maps and photos pinned to the corkboard behind her. The discovery in the old St. Agnes house had sent shockwaves through both the local police and the diocese. Word of the secret faith renewal centers had reached state and federal agencies within days, prompting a flurry of closed-door meetings, yet despite the mounting evidence, tangible proof remained elusive. The camps marked on the maps were in remote, often privately owned lands scattered across the Midwest. Many had changed ownership multiple times or existed in a legal gray zone under various church-affiliated organizations. Hart's gut told her that the camps were real. The question was, who had orchestrated them, and how deeply were they connected to the missing sisters? The journal suggested that Harriet and the others had been close to uncovering something dangerous, something worth silencing. And someone had silenced them. Hart knew she needed more. 2 weeks after the basement discovery, a break came unexpectedly. Father Marcus DeWitt, a former member of the diocese's Board of Trustees, contacted Hart through his lawyer. Now in his late 60s, retired and battling illness, DeWitt had watched the case from afar with growing guilt. The letter from Harriet had tipped his conscience past the breaking point. In a secured interview room at the sheriff's office, DeWitt laid trembling hands on the table and spoke. "I knew those women," he began hoarsely. "I knew what they were trying to do." Hart leaned in, recording the session. "Go on," she urged gently. DeWitt's eyes flickered with old fear. "There is a group, has been for decades. They call themselves the Ecclesia Purus, a so-called purifying arm of the church. But they're extremists. They believe that modern faith has been corrupted, that certain doctrines must be cleansed by force if needed." He paused, swallowing hard. "They operate through affiliated retreat centers. On paper, they offer spiritual renewal, counseling, rehabilitation. In truth, some are used to detain, re-educate, or erase individuals deemed threats to their cause." Hart's stomach turned. "You're saying these camps on the maps are part of that operation?" "Yes." DeWitt's voice cracked. "Years ago, I served on the board overseeing grant funds. I began noticing large sums funneled to shell foundations tied to these properties. Harriet and the other sisters, Margaret, Elaine, Beatrice, Maria, they were quietly investigating. They approached me for records. They had found links to previous disappearances, priests, dissenting nuns, lay workers, cases written off as suicides or voluntary departures." He wiped his brow. "I warned them, told them to be careful. Then they vanished." DeWitt slumped in his chair, the weight of his confession crushing him. Hart pressed for names, for details of current members, but DeWitt claimed he knew little beyond what he had shared. "It's a closed circle, secretive, ruthless. I feared for my life, still do." Word of DeWitt's testimony leaked to the press within days. The story reignited national interest. Major outlets dispatched investigative reporters to Vermont. Among them was Jacob Nolan, a seasoned journalist with the American Ledger known for exposing religious abuse scandals. Nolan dove headfirst into the Ecclesia Purist lead, traveling across 3 states to trace property records and contact potential witnesses. His inquiries soon focused on a former camp overseer identified in Harriet's journal as Brother Cal. Through persistent digging, Nolan discovered that the man's real name was Calvin Brooks, a former deacon excommunicated quietly a decade prior, now living under an alias. Nolan arranged to meet a source in a dilapidated motel outside Akron, Ohio, someone who claimed to have known Brooks during the camp's active years. The meeting was set for a Friday night, 3 weeks after DeWitt's interview. Nolan arrived alone, carrying only a voice recorder and notebook, but the source never showed. Frustrated, Nolan returned to his rental car. That's when he noticed the shadow moving behind him. The first blow came swift, a heavy fist driving him into the side of the car. Before he could react, 2 figures masked in dark hoodies dragged him into the adjacent alley. Nolan fought back, landing one wild punch, but a steel pipe caught his ribs. The world spun. Breathless, he hit the ground. Through blurred vision, he heard a gravelly voice near his ear. "Stop digging. You're next." Then silence. By the time Nolan staggered to his feet, the assailants were gone. His recorder had vanished. Shaken, he filed a police report, then contacted Sheriff Hart. The warning had been clear. The group was watching. And they were willing to protect their secrets violently. Sheriff Emily Hart sat in her office, exhausted but relentless, the words of Father DeWitt and the brutal attack on Jacob Nolan still echoing in her mind. The Ecclesia Purist lead had shifted the case from a tragic local mystery to something far darker and sprawling. Now each piece of evidence was scrutinized with fresh urgency. It was in this climate of mounting tension that an unexpected opportunity surfaced. During a follow-up search of the storage facilities at Our Lady of Providence Convent, prompted by a renewed warrant, Deputy Sarah Keene discovered a box labeled simply Vehicle Maintenance Archives. Inside, buried beneath stacks of outdated service manuals and old fuel receipts, lay a battered GFS tracking device. It was a first-generation model used by the convent in earlier years to monitor shared vehicles, including rental vans. The records suggested it had last been installed in the Ford Transit driven by Sister Harriet Lowe. The device had never been recovered during the initial investigation and had been presumed removed or discarded. Now, 5 years later, it offered a glimmer of hope. Sheriff Hart immediately sent the GPS unit to the State Forensic Lab, where technicians worked meticulously to extract its data. The device's memory was partially corrupted, but the core location history remained intact. When Hart received the reconstructed data 3 days later, her heart pounded. On the morning of April 25, 2015, the GPS showed the expected route, St. Abbey to Black Hollow Lake, with the recorded stop at the Silver Lake gas station. But then came the anomaly. At approximately 10:17 a.m., shortly after leaving the gas station, the van deviated from its route. Instead of continuing toward St. Martin's Chapel as originally intended, the vehicle turned east, following an unmarked forest road deep into the Green Mountain National Forest. The path, rough and narrow, was one not intended for public traffic. The GPS recorded movement along this path for nearly 6 miles, until abruptly the signal ceased. The last recorded location lay near an isolated stretch of forest known locally as Shaker's Run, an area devoid of maintained trails or structures on any official maps. Sheriff Hart knew this was significant. Either the device had been deliberately disabled or the signal had been jammed, both actions suggesting intent and technical capability beyond mere chance. Mobilizing a specialized search team equipped with satellite imaging and drones, Hart dispatched personnel to the last known coordinates. The forest was dense, the terrain challenging. For 2 days they scoured the area, uncovering subtle tire ruts beneath leaf litter, faint traces suggesting vehicular passage years prior. But it was a secondary discovery that sent ripples through the investigation. A local wildlife researcher named Dr. Daniel Croft, monitoring a long-term study of bobcat populations in the same quadrant of forest, came forward upon hearing news of renewed activity in Shaker's Run. He informed Hart's team that a motion-activated camera trap, part of his research grid, had been deployed near the area 5 years ago. The camera had long since been retrieved and its footage archived, but upon request, Droft provided access to the original files. What the team found left them speechless. At precisely 10:43 a.m. on April 23, 2015, the camera recorded movement. The time-stamped footage, though grainy in the shifting dappled light of the forest, was unmistakable. A dark green flatbed truck, matching the description provided by Earl Sims, rolled into frame, its rear canvas sides flapping loosely. The vehicle stopped out of sight, but moments later, 5 figures appeared in the clearing. The women were dressed in partial habits beneath civilian coats, their faces strained and weary. They were not moving freely. Around them, 3 men in dark tactical clothing guided them forcefully toward a partially obscured concrete structure, a decaying entrance to what appeared to be an old underground facility, perhaps a Cold War-era bunker or abandoned mining installation. The footage captured one sister, likely Sister Maria Alvarez based on stature and features, resisting briefly before being shoved forward. Another figure, possibly Sister Margaret, glanced directly at the camera, her eyes wide with fear, a fleeting moment of silent desperation frozen forever in pixelated form. The entire sequence lasted less than 2 minutes. The final frame showed the heavy metal door of the underground structure being pulled shut, sealing the women from view. Sheriff Hart played the footage over and over, each viewing deepening her resolve. This was no theory, no speculative lead. The sisters had been taken, not by accident or wilderness misadventure, but through coordinated abduction, executed with chilling precision. And the bunker, this forgotten relic in the heart of Vermont's wildlands, had become their prison. Armed with this new evidence, Hart prepared to mobilize a tactical response. But the forest held its secrets tightly, and Hart knew whoever had orchestrated the disappearance of the sisters might still wait watching, still waiting. The discovery of the wildlife camera footage sent shockwaves through both law enforcement and the church community. Sheriff Emily Hart convened an emergency task force, working closely with state police and federal agents now formally engaged in the case. The priority was clear: locate the underground structure and uncover what had happened to the missing sisters. Using topographic maps and aerial imagery, Hart's team identified the likely location of the old concrete bunker seen in the footage. Historical property records revealed that the structure was originally built in the 1960s as a fallout shelter for a private mining operation that had ceased decades ago. However, its current ownership presented a troubling complication. The land had been quietly purchased in 2008 by a corporate trust controlled by Leonard Faulkner, a prominent Vermont businessman and one of the church's most generous private benefactors. Faulkner was well known in religious and political circles for his philanthropy, having funded multiple church renovations, scholarships for seminary students, and even endowments for faith-based counseling centers. On paper, the trust's stated purpose was environmental conservation. In reality, Faulkner had used it to acquire several remote parcels across Vermont and neighboring states, many of them containing old industrial properties or isolated structures. 2 years after the sisters' disappearance, Faulkner had died suddenly under mysterious circumstances while vacationing abroad. Officially, the cause was a heart attack. Unofficially, whispers circulated about poisoning, business rivalries, or even internal church disputes. The trust managing his estate had since fragmented, its assets tangled in legal battles among distant relatives and shadowy shell companies. Navigating this labyrinth of ownership required weeks of legal maneuvering. Finally, armed with court authorization, Hart's team prepared to enter the site. On a cold morning in late November, the search team arrived at Shaker's Run with tactical gear, forensic equipment, and a wary sense of urgency. The entrance to the bunker lay half benobbled beneath layers of debris and moss, its reinforced steel door rusted but intact. Bolt cutters and hydraulic jacks pried it open with agonizing slowness. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and decay. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the earth. The deeper the team went, the clearer it became that this was no forgotten relic of the Cold War. It had been used. Recent footprints marred the dust near the entrance. Power lines, though aged, showed signs of modification. Down the main corridor, a series of small rooms branched off. In one, they found metal cots with tattered blankets. In another, plastic jugs of water long since evaporated. A locked storage room contained rusted chains, handcuffs, and remnants of religious iconography twisted into perverse symbols. But it was the largest chamber that held the most haunting evidence. Against one stained concrete wall, crude wooden crosses had been mounted in a macabre display. The floor bore deep scratches, as if someone, or several people, had clawed or dragged against it repeatedly. Forensic analysis would later confirm traces of human blood, hair, and epithelial cells consistent with multiple individuals. Yet there were no bodies, no living captives, only a stark message left behind by desperate hands. On the far wall, scrawled in dark pigment, were the words, "We were 5, now 3 remain. Keep searching." The handwriting was frantic, uneven, as if written under duress or with fading strength. Sheriff Hart stood before the message, her jaw tight. The implications were chilling. Not only had the sisters been held here, but at least 2 were unaccounted for by the time this message was left. And someone, whether captors or allies, had since removed any trace of them from the site. Deeper within the bunker, further signs of prolonged captivity emerged. A makeshift altar strewn with wilted flowers and scorched paper. Personal items believed to belong to the sisters, including rosaries and fragments of habit cloth, and a logbook containing cryptic notations of dates, scripture references, and single-word entries like "purified" or "departed." The language echoed that found in Harriet Lowe's journal, aligning disturbingly with the ideology of the Ecclesia Purist. Yet the bunker held no living soul. Whoever had controlled it had abandoned it, likely in response to renewed law enforcement activity or in the years following Faulkner's death. The timing raised further questions. Had Faulkner himself been complicit in the sisters' abduction? Had his death been connected to a falling out within the extremist faction? The puzzle only deepened. Meanwhile, analysis of the wildlife camera footage revealed another grim detail. Frame by frame enhancement showed one of the men escorting the sisters wearing a patch with an obscure insignia, a stylized serpent coiled around a cross, later identified as a symbol linked to known Ecclesia Purist enclaves in the Midwest. This suggested that the Vermont site was but one node in a larger, far-reaching network. As Hart compiled her findings for federal coordination, one thing was clear: the search was far from over. Somewhere 3 of the sisters might still be alive, or worse, trapped within the shadowy world that had claimed so many before them. The grim discovery inside the bunker had only fueled the urgency of the investigation. Sheriff Emily Hart, now coordinating with a joint task force involving the FBI and multiple state agencies, pressed deeper into the fragmented network of the Ecclesia Purists. Each document retrieved, each thread followed, pointed to a sprawling infrastructure built to disappear people deemed undesirable by the group's twisted doctrine. Yet the question that haunted Hart most remained unanswered. If 3 of the sisters had indeed survived beyond their captivity in the Vermont bunker, where were they now? The search expanded across state lines, focusing on properties connected through Leonard Faulkner's convoluted trust network. Analysts traced transactions to several nonprofit organizations posing as rehabilitation programs, faith-based work centers, and shelters across the Midwest. Each warranted scrutiny. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through an anonymous tip routed through an Indiana state corrections officer. The caller, a former inmate named Derek Mason, had recently completed a 6-month sentence in Pendleton Correctional Facility for nonviolent offenses. Upon release, he had entered a transitional program as part of his parole, where news coverage of the Vermont case caught his attention. Mason contacted the hotline established by the task force and was quickly routed to lead investigator Agent Sarah Levin. Over a tense 30-minute call, Mason described his experience at a work-based rehabilitation center operated under the name Hope Revival Ministry, located in an industrial zone on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana. "They say it's a shelter for the homeless," Mason explained, "but it's more like a sweatshop. They run a sewing operation in the back, real rough conditions, long hours, and the people running it, real tight-lipped. You don't ask questions." Mason went on to describe 2 women who stood out to him during his brief stint at the center. "They weren't like the others," he said. "Older, quiet, they kept to themselves, but I swear, they moved different, like they'd been through something bad. And under those clothing? I caught a glimpse once. One of them had rosary beads around her wrist. Another time, I heard her whispering prayers in Spanish. When shown aged photographs of the missing sisters, Mason identified Sisters Maria Alvarez and Beatrice King with cautious certainty. "I can't swear 100%, he said, "but if it ain't them, it's damn close." The tip galvanized the task force. Surveillance was quickly established on the Hope Revival Ministry site. Ostensibly a faith-based non-NUMA, the center received funding through multiple charitable channels linked to Faulkner's network, previously connected to Faulkner's network. Over the course of several days, agents documented a pattern of activity consistent with exploitative labor practices and potential human trafficking. The presence of armed private security at the perimeter added to the concern. After securing warrants, the Joint Task Force launched a coordinated operation. In the pre-dawn hours, federal agents and local law enforcement converged on the property. The raid unfolded swiftly. Inside the makeshift sewing facility, a dozen individuals were found working under harsh conditions. Among them was a frail woman fitting the description of Sister Maria Alvarez. Clad in worn civilian clothing, her hair cropped short, she appeared gaunt and disoriented. As agents moved to secure the scene, Sister Maria recoiled in fear, her eyes darting wildly. It took considerable coaxing and the calming presence of a female agent before she allowed herself to be led away. In a nearby room designated as living quarters, personal effects were seized, including a battered wooden rosary and a small cloth pouch embroidered with initials matching those of the missing sisters. A second woman, believed to be Sister Beatrice, was not found on site. Witnesses reported she had been removed from the center 2 days prior under undisclosed circumstances, a development that raised immediate alarm. Meanwhile, Sister Maria was transported to a secured medical facility. Initial assessments confirmed significant physical deterioration consistent with long-term malnutrition and confinement. Psychologically, she exhibited signs of trauma, induced dissociation, and partial amnesia. When Agent Levin first attempted to interview her, Sister Maria spoke in fragmented sentences, alternating between Spanish and English. She struggled to recall recent events, often lapsing into confused states, or reciting prayers mechanically. However, one phrase emerged repeatedly amid her disjointed speech: "the other, not safe." Still taken hitherto, forensic examiners were able to confirm her identity through fingerprint examiners and dental records. There was no doubt. One of the missing sisters had been found alive after more than 5 years in captivity. The news reverberated through both law enforcement channels and the religious community, reigniting public attention on the case. Yet for Sheriff Hart and the task force, the partial victory was shadowed by urgency. That at least one other sister remained in active captivity, somewhere. The hunt was far from over. The recovery of Sister Maria Alvarez marked a pivotal moment in the long and harrowing investigation. Yet the woman who now lay in the secured medical wing of St. Joseph's Trauma Center in Indianapolis was only a fractured shadow of the devout and spirited sister who had once knelt in the Abbey's sunlit chapel. Physically frail, her body bore the marks of prolonged abuse and neglect. Mentally, she teetered on the brink of coherence, her memories fragmented by trauma, her trust carefully guarded behind a veil of fear. Under the supervision of trauma specialists and forensic psychologists, a slow and cautious process of rehabilitation began. For days, Sister Maria spoke little beyond whispered prayers, her gaze drifting to unseen figures only she perceived. The presence of Sheriff Emily Hart, now a familiar and steady face in the room, seemed to offer some measure of comfort. With patience, and under gentle prompting from both Hart and a trauma counselor fluent in Spanish, the dam of silence began to crack. It started with brief, jarring phrases, taken, underground, forced prayers, uttered between tremors and tears. Over successive sessions, a clearer narrative emerged, pieced together from Maria's halting recollections and occasional lucid bursts. She described how, on the morning of April 23, 2015, the 5 sisters had indeed diverted from their intended route under subtle coercion, following what they believed to be an urgent summons from a trusted church contact. The green flatbed truck had intercepted them under false pretenses, its occupants presenting forged credentials and invoking the authority of high-ranking clerics. By the time the deception unraveled, it was too late. They were transported to the bunker at Shaker's Run, stripped of their identities and subjected to a brutal faith renewal program, a euphemism for forced indoctrination orchestrated by the Ecclesias Paris. The goal was not merely imprisonment, but systematic re-education, aimed at breaking their spiritual autonomy and remolding them into compliant instruments of the group's extremist vision. Over weeks that bled into months, the sisters were subjected to isolation, sensory manipulation, and relentless dogmatic conditioning. Maria spoke of Scripture twisted into tools of control, of chants replacing prayers, of physical punishments meted out for resistance. Yet despite the suffering, solidarity endured. We prayed, in secret, she whispered. We held each other. As her strength returned, Maria revealed a chilling truth. 2 of her sisters, Margaret Bell and Beatrice King, had perished during their captivity. Margaret, she claimed, had succumbed to untreated illness, exacerbated by confinement, her pleas for medical aid ignored until it was too late. Beatrice's fate was even more sinister. Maria recounted how she had been taken from the group under the pretext of advanced purification and never returned. The message scrawled on the bunker wall, "We were 5, now 3 remain. Keep searching," had been written by Harriet Lowe, whose defiant spirit endured even in the face of despair. Maria's eventual removal from the Vermont bunker had not signaled rescue, but relocation. Along with Harriet, she had been transferred to the Hope Revival Ministry site under strict supervision, their identities further erased amid the transient homeless population. During the transfer, the sisters were separated. Maria had not seen Harriet since that day. The fate of the 5th sister, Elaine Moore, remained uncertain, though Maria believed she had been kept alive, for youth, as the captors chillingly phrased it. Yet perhaps the most explosive revelation came during an early morning session when Maria, trembling but resolute, uttered words that sent shockwaves through the task force. "There is one inside," she said, her voice cracking. When pressed, she elaborated haltingly. Among the current leadership of St. Abby's Abbey, at least one individual operated as a covert adherent of the Ecclesia Puris, facilitating the sisters' betrayal from within. Maria did not know the infiltrator's name, only that she had overheard whispered conversations referencing a guardian still embedded within the Abbey's hierarchy. The betrayal cut deep. Hart and Agent Levin recognized the implications immediately. Not only had the original abduction been facilitated with inside knowledge, but any future operations risked compromise unless the infiltrator was identified and neutralized. The task force initiated a discreet internal investigation, deploying counter-surveillance measures and psychological profiling within both St. Agnes Abbey and Our Lady of Providence Convent. Simultaneously, they intensified the search for Harriet Lowe and Elaine Moore, whose survival, however uncertain, now carried new urgency. As Maria continued her painstaking recovery, her courage remained unbroken. Between sessions, she clutched a worn rosary salvaged from the raid, a silent testament to the faith that had sustained her through unimaginable darkness. And though her voice often trembled, one phrase remained constant in her fragmented narrative, a mantra of hope amid horror. "They are not finished. We must not stop." The revelations from Sister Maria Alvarez had ignited a firestorm within the task force. With proof that the Ecclesia Puris had infiltrated the Church's own institutions, the investigation shifted into its most dangerous phase. The existence of an embedded operative within the Abbey hierarchy demanded swift and covert action. Intelligence analysts pored over communication logs, financial records, and personnel files, seeking the mole Maria had described. Patterns emerged, pointing towards St. Helena Convent, a lesser-known, privately funded cloister in upstate New York, known within certain circles for its ultra-Orthodox leanings. The convent had received generous donations from Leonard Faulkner's Trust, and several of its administrators had ties to now-defunct renewal programs traced back to the Ecclesia Puris network. Under the cover of night, surveillance teams were deployed around the sprawling stone complex of St. Helena. For days they observed an unsettling pattern. Certain sisters were restricted from sections of the convent. A select inner circle of clergy and staff operated with near-military precision. Shipments arrived late at night and were transferred through a secondary entrance leading to the convent's east wing, an area unaccounted for in official blueprints. The evidence was mounting, but a direct assault on sacred church ground required careful legal maneuvering. Leveraging the growing dossier of criminal activity and trafficking linked to the Ecclesia Puris, the task force secured a federal warrant authorizing a precision raid. At 4:12 a.m. on a cold December morning, a joint strike team comprised of FBI agents, state police, and tactical operatives breached the perimeter of St. Helena. The convent's heavy oak doors were bypassed silently, with teams moving swiftly through the halls. In the east wing, hidden behind an innocuous tapestry, they discovered a reinforced door concealed within the masonry. Using cutting tools, the operatives gained entry into a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward. The air grew colder and heavier with each step. Below ground, they uncovered a newly constructed chamber, a crude detention facility built within the bones of the ancient convent. The walls bore symbols of the Ecclesia Puris, painted in stark crimson against bare concrete. Heavy chains hung from iron rings set into the walls. Crude wooden cots lined the floor. Personal effects were scattered about: clothing, prayer books, and makeshift journals. But it was the far corner of the room that drew the team's focus. There, shackled but alive, was Sister Harriet Lowe. Gaunt and pale, her eyes blinked against the sudden glare of flashlight beams. At first she recoiled, uncertain whether the figures before her were saviors or yet another facet of her torment. Only when a female agent knelt beside her and whispered a familiar prayer did recognition and relief flood her hollowed gaze. Sister Harriet was freed and immediately transported to a waiting medical unit. Elsewhere within the hidden complex, the operatives detained several members of the inner circle. Among them was Father Gideon Marin, a high-ranking ecclesiastical figure long suspected of sympathizing with radical factions but never formally charged. Intelligence suggested he functioned as a key architect of the Ecclesia Puris's modern operations. His arrest marked a major coup for the task force, yet the victory was soon marred by an ominous turn. While in secured custody, awaiting transport, Father Marin was found unresponsive in his holding cell, a thin trail of blood at the corner of his mouth. Emergency response was swift, but efforts to revive him failed. Preliminary autopsy indicated cyanide poisoning, administered via a concealed capsule, likely hidden in dental work. The message was clear. The Ecclesia Puris operated under strict codes of silence, its members prepared to die rather than divulge secrets. The loss of Marin was a bitter blow, robbing investigators of a critical source of intelligence. Still, the rescue of Sister Harriet provided a beacon of hope. Preliminary interviews conducted under careful medical supervision revealed harrowing details of the Ecclesia Puris conflicts, operations, and inner structure. Harriet confirmed Maria's account of the Faith Renewal program and provided additional names of clerics and lay operatives linked to the network. Crucially, she corroborated the presence of a mole within the higher echelons of St. Agnes Abbey, a figure known to her only as the Shepherd. The search for this infiltrator now took on renewed urgency, even as agents continued to dismantle the physical remnants of the Ecclesia Puris network across multiple states. The months following the raid on St. Helena were a blur of relentless investigation, political maneuvering, and painful truths. The ecclesiastic network, though fractured, remained elusive. Dozens of affiliated sites across the Midwest were raided, yielding troves of documents, coded communications, and further evidence of forced indoctrination and trafficking under the guise of spiritual renewal. The rescue of Sisters Maria Alvarez and Harriet Lowe had offered critical first-hand testimony, yet it was clear that the network's reach extended far beyond what had been uncovered. Under intense protection, both women underwent extensive medical treatment and psychological rehabilitation. Their strength and resilience amazed all who witnessed their recovery, though neither would ever fully escape the scars of their ordeal. Through painstaking cross-rephrasing of records and survivor accounts, investigators confirmed the fates of Sisters Margaret Bell and Beatrice King. Margaret had died within the Vermont bunker, her body likely disposed of by the captors during a forced relocation of the site. Beatrice's trail ended at an abandoned Ecclesia Puris compound in rural Iowa, where blood traces matched her DNA, but no remains were ever recovered. For the families of the lost sisters, closure remained agonizingly incomplete. Sister Elaine Moore's fate hung in the balance for months, Then, in a joint operation with international law enforcement, a human trafficking ring in southern Italy was dismantled, and among the freed captives was a gaunt woman matching Elaine's description. Identification through dental records and a distinctive birthmark confirmed the miraculous discovery. Sister Elaine Moore had survived a decade of shifting captivity across multiple continents. Her condition was dire, her mind battered by years of exploitation, but with proper care, fragments of her old self began to emerge. In hushed tones, she spoke of other captives, of transfers conducted under cover of night, and of a shadowy council orchestrating the entire operation. Meanwhile, the hunt for internal collaborators escalated. The code name The Shepherd led investigators to Sister Clarice Vaughan, a respected administrator at St. Agnes Abbey. Beneath her pious facade lay a trail of encrypted communications and financial transactions linking her to key figures within the Ecclesia Paris. Arrested during a midnight sweep, Vaughan maintained an eerie calm, offering no resistance. During interrogation, she refused to name her higher contacts, instead reciting scripture with a hollow smile. Yet the investigation revealed deeper rot. Among the recovered Ecclesia Paris ledgers was a list of clerical patrons and protectors. While many names belonged to obscure fringe figures, one name sent a chill through the highest ranks of the Church: Bishop Alden Pierce, a sitting member of the North American Bishops' Council, known for his vocal advocacy of traditionalist doctrine. Though not directly tied to operational aspects of the ecclesiastic Pyrrhus, Pierce's financial contributions and private correspondence suggested complicity or, at minimum, willful blindness. Political pressure and legal maneuvering shielded Pierce from immediate prosecution, but his name remained on a classified watch list, and internal church inquiries were quietly launched. Publicly, law enforcement presented a carefully worded conclusion. In a joint press conference, Sheriff Hart and FBI Director Alan Graves outlined the dismantling of key nodes of the Ecclesia Pyrrhus network, the recovery of 3 surviving sisters, and the tragic confirmed deaths of 2 others. They emphasized the ongoing nature of the investigation and the likelihood of undiscovered collaborators still operating within church and affiliated institutions. Privately, both Hart and Graves acknowledged the unsettling truth. The list of perpetrators remained incomplete. Names had been redacted, evidence destroyed, and witnesses silenced. The Ecclesia Pyrrhus might have been crippled, but it was not wholly eradicated. For the survivors, reintegration proved bittersweet. Sister Maria and Sister Harriet, after months of treatment, chose to retire from public religious life, finding sanctuary in a private convent abroad. Sister Elaine, though fragile, expressed a desire to eventually return to St. Agnes, to honor the memory of her fallen sisters, and to testify against those who had perpetrated their suffering. The memorial services for Sisters Margaret Bell and Beatrice King drew mourners from across the nation, their faces solemn beneath the vaulted arches of St. Agnes Abbey. As the 10th anniversary of the sisters' disappearance approached, Sheriff Hart stood once more beneath the towering pines of Black Hollow Lake. The forest remained silent, its secrets now partially unearthed, yet not fully revealed. She knew the fight was not over. Somewhere in the shadowed corridors of power, remnants of the Ecclesia Pyrrhus still whispered, still plotted. And until every last name was known, until every hidden hand was exposed, the search would continue. Because in the words scrawled long ago on a bunker wall, words that now echoed in every briefing and every vow of the task force, we were 5, now 3 remain. Keep searching. Before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think really happened to the missing sisters? And which part of this story shocked you the most? Take a moment and leave a comment. And while you're at it, tell us where in the world you're watching from today. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more true mystery stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. We've got more stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.